Again, my name is Jenn Gile. I will talk a little bit about my background as it pertains to this, but first of all, let me kind of get a feel for who's in the room. How many people are here who run some kind of a security program? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you are former developers? Oh, a lot. Okay. Put your hands down. How many of you wish you had better luck getting engineering, finance, procurement, whoever to sign off on your stuff? Great, you're in the right place. How many of you came here because my talk didn't say anything about AI in the schedule? I'll talk a little bit about AI later, more as how it could help you with this, but this is a talk about people, not tools. And in my experience, when programs fail, it's not usually because of the tools. It's usually because the relationships and the organizational stuff is not quite where it needs to be. As all of you security owners know, getting people to care about security is an uphill battle. And I'm here to tell you, you can be successful at your job without getting people to care about security. Do you believe that? See a little like maybe skepticism? Stick with me.
It depends.
It depends, yeah. So as was mentioned in the intro, I have been around a while. I've been at the State Department. I've worked in Layer 7 networking. I'm currently in application security. I've been in lots of different industries. And what kind of is a theme throughout all of them is it's been my job to get people to do things that they didn't want to do. Does that feel familiar? Yeah. So I'm going to talk about some core skills that you can use. And honestly, this is applicable whether you're a security program owner or you just want to be better at communicating and influencing. So we're going to talk first about why people adopt security programs, security features. I'm going to use the example of Face ID. Who remembers when this came out a couple years ago? Did you choose to use it? How many iPhone users do I have first off? Okay. Did you choose to use Face ID because it made the security of your phone better? No. Why did you use it? Easy. It made it easier. It was simpler. I'll be honest, it came out during COVID when we were all wearing masks, and I was like, thank goodness I have one of these old phones with the thumbprint thing because this thing doesn't know who I am. But the key to getting people to adopt security is about appealing to what's important to those people. How many of you have ever bought software? Good number. So I want you to think about the people selling you that software. Did those people come from your exact job? Probably not. You were probably buying from people who are working at that company who've never owned a security program before. Have you ever thought about that that's who you buy from? So how do they know what to say to you? What do you think?
They know people.
They know people. How do they figure out people? Dustin, what do you think?
Studied them, they study the psychology of people.
Yeah.
Or they've just been around people their whole life.
Some of it you can absorb naturally, and some of it requires actual kind of like social psychology studying. This is not something you need to go to school for. This is not a crazy complex science. You don't need a degree in this, but this is something that people in marketing and sales do every day in their careers. And I'm here to tell you that there's actually a problem with security. Security has a messaging issue. So over here, we've got security talking about things like mean time to remediation, new vulnerabilities discovered, current open findings, vulnerability fixes, SLAs, overall risk level. Do you hear a lot of engineers using those words? No. In fact, I was at All Things Open last week. It's one of the biggest open source conferences in the country. It appeals mostly to developers. I go to things like this because ultimately at the end of the day, people using our products are actually developers, and to know what's going on in their minds is really important. And I'm going to tell you something that for you former developers might shock you, or you might be like, yep, that tracks. I didn't talk to a single person there who knew what application security was. Not a single person. When I would talk to them about application security, they might be like, oh yeah, something about a WAF. Does this track? Yeah. So they don't know what vulnerabilities are necessarily, or CVEs, or MTTR, or even an SCA or a SAST. This is all security acronyms. What they think about, and this goes across multiple stakeholder groups that you might have, they care about things like developer productivity, uptime, release velocity, revenue, reducing cost, compliance. The keynote this morning, how many people saw that keynote? Some of these themes were in that keynote as we were talking, as Jeff was talking about how you can look at efficiencies in security, communicating it through the things that your stakeholders care about, not the things that you care about. So when I say it's possible to get people to do what you want without them caring about your security program, this is how. You talk to them in this language, not in this language. But even if you've been a former developer, it's probably been a minute. You might not know how the developers at your organization are thinking about their programs, what their priorities are. I'm going to go through 3 skills that you can use that are borrowed from a job family called product marketing. Anybody heard of a product marketer before? What do you know about product marketing? You can't just use the words product and marketing. What do you know? I saw hands over here.
You talk to customers and set the priorities.
Talk to customers and set the priorities. What else do they do?
They learn about what they can sell, who would buy.
They have to understand the product. They have to understand the market. They have to teach the people inside the company about the market. They teach those salespeople. They teach their customer success team. They teach the other marketers. They do a lot of internal teaching, and then they do a lot of external research. I'm a former product marketer, and some of the things that falls under this job family is skills I'm going to teach you today. So overall, they're responsible for understanding the market. They define product positioning. They create the messaging, the go-to-market strategies, the sales enablement, and the cross-functional collaboration across the entire company that results in a product launching. Most of the time, when a product fails or a company fails, it's not because the product is bad, it's because these things were missing. So the things I'm going to focus on today are understanding the market, how can you understand your quote-unquote market, and how to create compelling messaging, how to speak to your stakeholders in a way that they're going to respond to. So I'm going to go over 5 steps to communicating value. We're going to start down here at the bottom, and these are concentric circles for a reason. It has to be done in this order, or it's not worth your time. Identifying the buying community, gathering information, creating personas, writing messaging, and validating. And I'll pause here for a second and say, you're going to see some real dense slides coming up, and that's on purpose. It's not something you need to absorb. If you want to see these slides afterwards, just DM me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll send them to you. I've also produced a lot of articles that you can read and get more out of it. So feel free to take pictures, but also know you don't have to if you don't want to. Okay, step 1, identifying your buying community. So I work in application security. This is an AppSec conference. So we're just going to kind of focus on AppSec as the program owner here. So you're going to be looking for 3 categories of quote unquote buying committees. Whether there's money involved or not, you have to think of your security program as a product. Who in your organization is going to buy your product? You have your technical champions who are going to understand your product and evangelize it for you, perhaps use it. You're going to have your budget holders, pretty self-explanatory, and your influencers, those people in the organization who maybe won't use the product, but can go help you push through a purchase order or get to the right person. So what are some examples of titles in your organization that might fit under a technical champion? Architect. What else?
Security champion.
Maybe a security champion, sure. Your developers, right? What about budget holders? Who's got the purse strings?
VP, finance.
Yeah, CFO.
Could be CFO, could be VP of finance, could be your CISO, could be a head of engineering. What about influencers? Who's going to influence whether or not your program is successful, whether or not your product gets bought? I hear customers, I hear security champions. Legal. Yes.
That's influence. I think that's like a hammer.
Yeah.
Complaints.
Compliance. So these are just examples. I would put anybody who's kind of like hands-on with tech in the technical champions category. That can be your developers, your security champions, your DevOps, your GRC people. They may be your end users. Often your budget is coming from a security leader or a CISO, but perhaps finance could be above that. And then again, influencing, you kind of hit those areas as well. So step one is identify your buying committee. These are the people you need to be influencing. Now, they're gonna be of varying levels of importance. So for example, when you're thinking about the need to really get someone on board with your product, maybe the thing that matters the most is getting the budget holder's approval. But you could theoretically have your CISO's approval, but your engineering leader over there is like, no way in hell am I gonna let you implement this new tool. You're not gonna slow down my devs, right? So you need to have all three buckets covered. Once you know who your buying committee is, you need to start gathering information. So this goes back to how do we know what these people want? You ask. It's pretty simple. And it's pretty amazing how empathy building and how credibility building it is to go ask somebody about their problems. I want to know about you. So you're going to gather information in two ways. Think of this as qualitative through interviews, quantitative through data. I'm going to focus on the qualitative part because the quantitative part you probably have down. You can go into your dashboards. You can see what your backlog looks like. You can see what your mean time to remediation is. You can get all of that. The quantitative stuff is what's really important and what's going to really, or qualitative is going to build empathy for you. So what does this look like? Doing an interview. Here's one of those dense slides I promised was here. It's okay if you can't read it. Part of the point here is to illustrate that this is a process that's going to require reading, writing, iterating, picture yourself at your computer. So throughout this, I'm going to use an example of building out messaging for an engineering leader, because for security programs, the make or break person is often your partner over in engineering. And so what I would say, regardless of who you're interviewing, is you want to have three different categories of questions. The first category is going to focus in on that person's role and responsibilities. Now, I generally recommend one-on-one interviews, but if you want to interview people in a group, that's okay. Things like, can you describe your role and what your team is responsible for? What are your primary goals and objectives? What are the biggest challenges you face? Next, you want to get into goals and motivators. Why do these people come to work? Why do they get paid? What keeps you up at night? What are your goals? How do you measure success? What are some of your metrics? What have I not asked about yet? What do you see missing here? I haven't asked about security. I have not said a damn thing about security. Why is that? Exactly. You need to understand their world first. And if you walk into an interview and the first thing you do is start asking them about security, it's going to do two things. One, it's going to communicate to them that this is about me. It's not about you. And they're going to be predisposed to complain, to think that this is like a waste of their time. This is their opportunity to air their grievances. Start by making it about them.
Can I make an observation?
Please do. Yeah.
So if you go back to
Oops.
the next slide, this is super important, I think. They're open-ended questions where people can expand upon. They're not yes or no questions.
Exactly.
Which makes a huge difference in terms of talking to people.
There's,
To get them to open up.
yeah. You'll notice in much of what we do in the product marketing world, it is those open-ended questions because we need a story. And humans tell stories. If you give them a binary choice, most people take the easy way out. What I didn't cover here is we do get to the security practices and pain points third. Now, if interviewing is something new to you, if it makes you nervous, if you're not great at those open-ended questions, there's a book that I recommend. We don't have like a dry erase board in here, but I'm happy to send it out later. It's called The Coaching Habit. And the coaching habit has nothing to do with security. It's all about asking questions to be able to get people to think through their problems and provide their own answers. What I love about the coaching habit is it gives you like 6 or 7 questions that you can ask instead of telling them what you think. So maybe they say, what are your biggest concerns or pain points related to application security? And they give you an answer that you really want to argue with. Don't do it. Instead, you might say, and why is that? Or tell me more. More open-ended questions. Your job in this interview, and it's going to be really hard, is to not give an opinion. You are there to absorb, you're there to show empathy, and you're there to collect information. Now, some tips. Also, heavy, dense. I will send this to you afterwards if you're interested. It's in some articles I've written. That was a lot of questions on the previous slide. You should not ask 20 questions. I find for a half-hour interview, even 10 questions is too many. 5 to 10, depending on how much time you have, can be a good sweet spot. It depends on the size of your organization, how many people you want to interview. If you have a big enough organization that there's like diversity in your engineering leaders, and some are from acquisitions and some deal with hardware, whatever it is, then you want a larger sample size. If you're from a smaller organization, maybe a couple people is fine. I always recommend sharing questions in advance. This does a couple of things. It shows the person, I respect your time. And for people who are more internal processors, it gives them the opportunity to think about their answers first. It feels a little less like gotcha. Now, not everybody will prepare. Not everybody will look at the questions. I can tell you right now, if somebody sent me the questions, I'm the type to be like, cool, I'm ready to go. But my husband would be the type who's like, I'm gonna write an essay on this. So know your people. What else? What other tips? We talked about active listening and probing questions. You mentioned that security slows down development. Can you give me specific examples? Be empathetic. And then I created this slide maybe 6 months ago before a lot of the Gen AI stuff had taken off. I'm gonna come back to where AI can be helpful. My last bullet here is about note-taking, and I would actually amend this to say, record all your interviews. And I'll explain why later. But I would record them. Sure, you can take notes, but we have an AI tool for that. Okay, your next step is going to be to create personas. Has anybody heard of a persona before? Yeah, you've probably worked somewhere that has them. I can certainly say I've worked in an office that had them plastered all over, and you could walk around and there were the cardboard cutouts and you could stand with the persona. That's not what I'm telling you to do. It's a little goofy. What a persona is it's a research-based representation of a group of people. So the research that you did, all those interviews, all the data gathering, you're going to use to start to build a persona. It's a generic representation, in this case, of an engineering leader. You're going to be going over responsibilities, goals and motivators, metrics, pain points, attitudes. We're doing great on time. This is another dense slide that, again, I'll send you. But this is kind of an example of the type of content that you might see in a persona. It's nice to start with a little bit of a narrative. Who is this person? Why are they an influencer in my buying committee? So this is an engineering leader. They're a key stakeholder because their teams are primary end users of our programs. We need their buy-in because they're critical for helping us gather requirements. We can't deploy this thing without them. And frankly, if they don't like it, it's not happening. We can get them on our side by displaying empathy for their team's frustrations and showing how our programs and tools can make things easier for them. And then, for example, we have some sample titles, because again, this is an amalgamation. This is not a person. It may hurt you to do this, but you should have a little temperature gauge on what their attitude is toward your team. In this case, this is generic, but they probably have a little bit of a negative view of application security. There's a little bit of an explanation of why. In this fictitious example, they know that they have to deal with FedRAMP, so they see AppSec as a necessary evil, but they don't want to deal with you. They know you're going to slow them down. And then we've got information on their responsibilities. They oversee an engineering team. They have to have timely and high quality software releases. They manage resources and budgets. They drive efficiency and innovation. And then the final part of the persona is a little bit more of that data. What are their metrics? What do they care about? In this case, they use DORA metrics. That's how they measure their success. They care a lot about app uptime and performance, and they care about developer satisfaction and productivity. Finally, at the very bottom of the persona document, you're going to have your security pain points. So again, you're focused more on who is this person, what do they care about, and then you finally talk about why they're having pain with your tooling. So I'm going to pause here because I like to do questions throughout rather than at the very end when you've forgotten what you want to talk about. So what are your thoughts, questions, reactions to the idea of building a persona for an engineering leader or somebody else?
So I have a perspective from the persona itself,
Yeah.
profiling to a certain degree. You can actually get metrics from tools and interactions they've had in their environment, and then those in accordance to security applications as well. So that you basically can tell before you sit down with them and understand how receptive they are, how not. Because basically what you're going to contend with is what do you control and what can you influence at the level of influence. So, and that's a continual thing. So the persona itself doesn't always have to be written, but from your meet and greet, your networking, it's a constant grow and grow and get better and understand where their pain points are to become their champion so that they can be willing participants in the vehicle as opposed to just a passenger.
That's a great point. And unless you're brand new to an organization, you probably have some inklings already, right, of like what their metrics are and what they care about. So as you go into these interviews, you could say something like, hey, I know that you have a 99.99% uptime requirement and that there have been some issues with that. I want to talk about how we could help you fix that. That kind of a conversation, I didn't use the word security, I didn't use vulnerabilities or remediation or anything. I'm focused on their metrics. Yeah.
Yeah, we also used surveys, not like 10 pages or 10 question surveys.
I don't understand.
Someone responded nicely.
Thank you, Siri.
We also use surveys, like when we do interviews or when we do interact and try to build that relationship with the engineering leaders and everyone. We send 3 or 4 question surveys asking hey, would it be better? What is your style? Like, did you like it or something? That really helped. Calling those surveys at the end of the interviews really helped us to get better for the next interaction.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You can use surveys in lots of different ways in your both information gathering and decision-making process. So you could send a survey out before you do interviews and you could survey all the developers. You could have it be unrelated to this program altogether and say, we regularly survey developers about implementations and here's what was in our last thing. Or, we've talked a little bit about security champions here. We already sat down with the security champion group and here's what they said. There's lots of ways you can gather this data. So great point.
So when you're creating personas, you're sort of generalizing, right?
Yes.
You're grouping people into categories, more or less. How do you reconcile that with the fact that everyone's unique and there are different individuals that have different thoughts and so forth?
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question to make sure everyone can hear it. A persona is a generalization. You can take it as far, I think the word used back here was it's a stereotype. And as you're using them, it is important to keep in mind that this is kind of like the 80%, if you follow an 80-20 rule, there's always gonna be some unique edge cases, right? So you'll want your persona to be pretty typical of the 80%, and then be understanding that there may be a sub persona that's different than this, but it kind of depends how vastly different is it? Because chances are good They may have different pain points, let's say, because of their uniqueness, but I bet their metrics probably aren't massively different because you all roll up to the same organization. The CTO, the head of product, whatever, probably has some like mandates. Maybe you even have access to their OKRs, their KPIs, whatever, abbreviation salad you want to throw in there. Does that help? Okay, I think I saw a hand over here.
I was just going to say, sometimes it helps to differentiate the type of engineering team you're dealing with. So you may not be able to lump like feature teams and shared services teams into the same persona. You might have to separate them because those leaders are going to be very concerned about different metrics. They're measured with the same metrics, but different ones are more important. And their pain points and interactions with your teams may be different. So for example, in my org, we have a core platform team that does all of our DevOps coaching and consulting, but they also maintain uptime on our SaaS platform. So depending on the persona class I'm looking at, they're very differently concerned about AppSec things than, say, a feature development team.
Yeah, so the point being that depending on the product they work on can have a very different influence on how they answer these questions. I would say also the maturity of their stack or the purpose of their product. If they run the product that's in the FedRAMP environment, they probably have a very different set of requirements than your team that's doing like AI innovation, right? Okay, so what have we done so far? We've identified the buying committee, so we know who your stakeholders are. We have interviewed the key ones, and then we've created persona documents for each of them. Now, I do actually recommend physically documenting this. While it's good to have it in your head, especially the bigger your team is, the more benefit it is to actually writing these things down. We'll come back to, but will anybody read it, Jen? We'll come back to that. Okay, number 4, you're gonna write your messaging guide. A messaging guide is a way of getting everybody on the same page. Have you ever worked in a company where somebody from sales describes the product in one way, somebody in engineering describes it another way, someone in marketing describes it a third way? That's indicative of a messaging problem, that people are not all together focused on one thing. And so as a security owner, the value of having a messaging guide is that you have a consistent way to talk about a program that you want to pitch. So you wouldn't do this for every program, but I would say for major initiatives where you know you're going to need cross-organization buy-in, having an internal messaging guide of how to talk about this project is going to be really helpful to you. So in the example that I'll give shortly, we'll talk about having a messaging guide for rolling it out a new SCA tool. You might have a messaging guide for rolling out a security champions program. You might have a messaging guide for, I don't know, completely re-architecting your team and moving it into product. Whatever the case may be, this can help you have a consistent way so that people within your organization, from the analyst all the way up to the CISO, can talk about it in the same way. So a messaging guide should have 5 general categories: your problem statement, the impact, what you're going to do to impact the people, the value props, the supporting evidence, and the call to action. And I'll go over each of these in more depth. Again, this is a sample that I'll send out afterwards, but this is going to be your sample messaging guide for pitching a new AppSec tool to engineering. And in this case, the tool you're pitching is the new SCA tool, or software composition analysis. So you're going to write a problem statement. The current SCA tool is ineffective because it doesn't align with software development practices, creating a poor developer experience. It's disruptive, it's inaccurate. You'll notice none of that is about security, right? Because your audience for this is not the security people. Your audience is outside of security. They care about different things. So these are their problems, not your problems. You're going to talk about the impact of this tool being disruptive and inaccurate. It causes release delays, developer frustration. It increases your MTTR, and it slows innovation. Now, before we even get into what the tool is, if I went to engineering and I said, hey, I know you have some issues with this tool. I know it's slowing down your release velocity. You want to talk about it? The answer is going to be yes, because you've gone in there and used their language. you're gonna have two different categories of value props. And this is where I find a lot of practitioners need a little bit more practice, is it's very easy to talk about the technical value props. It has all these bells and whistles and it does all this cool stuff. It is harder to talk about the business value props because you have to understand what's important to the business. So the business value props in this example is overall, we expect this tool to reduce the amount of developer time spent on security issues and decreasing the likelihood of breaking changes. The business value props is you're gonna have higher confidence in findings. The findings are gonna be intelligent. You're gonna catch risk early. The technical value props, these are the reasons I've chosen this particular tool. It has program analysis, it has reachability, it has policies and fixed recommendations and PR comments, features down here, business stuff up here. Does that make sense? Now, we all work in tech or tech adjacent, right? People like evidence. How can I believe that what you're telling me is true? And so as you're thinking through these messaging guides, what is the evidence that you're gonna give in this example to your engineering team that the new tool is gonna do what's promised? Well, we say that it's gonna decrease false positives and decrease JIRA tickets. Okay, that's great, engineering loves that. Prove it to me. So, there's some examples here of the proof points that you might give them. And then finally, you want a call to action. It's very easy to say your call to action is give me money, but think through what do you really need from this group in order for your project to be successful? Well, you probably need people, right? If you're gonna be doing a POV of a new SCA tool, you probably need someone from the platform or the DevOps team to help you implement. Maybe you need some people to test it. And so the call to action for them, the thing that you're gonna be asking of them is, hey, I need a couple of people for 5 hours next week, or 5 hours on the next sprint, or whatever the case may be. So let's pause here on our messaging guide before we go on and talk about the final steps and the ways that we can integrate this and make it really useful. What questions or thoughts do you have about a messaging guide? Back here.
What's the format? Is it a slide or an email to people, or do you take them through it in a presentation?
Great question. What's the format? I've seen a lot of different formats. I can tell you what I like. I like a Google Doc or a Word doc or something like that. It's easier typically for people to read and digest than a slide. So I would never, ever, ever send this to anybody. It's on this because I actually used to do this talk with a Google Doc and I had to toggle back and forth and it was a gigantic pain. Who needs to read it? Only the people in your team need to read it. So you could certainly send it to an engineering leader and say, hey, did I get this right? Is this what you guys care about? It's okay, you can show them your homework. But I would keep it internal to your team. I would keep it in something editable because these things are a living document. And shortly I'll kind of talk about why having something like this in this type of a format is helpful. Does that help you? Yeah. Sure. Other thoughts? Would you use a messaging document? What do you think?
Whatever your org supports. For example, in our org, mostly we use Confluence as a way to communicate. So you need to understand what is the mode of communication within your team.
Yeah, understanding the mode of communication with your team. You could absolutely make this a Confluence page. That would be totally fine. In terms of communicating through your organization, keep in mind that the messaging document yourself is like your own cheat sheet. So, I know you manage a team, right? And you probably want your whole team to be talking about this SCA rollout in the same way. So what you might do is you'd do all the things we've talked about, and then you'd schedule a team meeting. And you'd say, hey, I'm gonna send this to you as a pre-read. Come ready with your questions. And then, the next time you're ready to email the VP of engineering, whoever, fill in the blank, I want you to use this as you're writing the email. Does that make sense? Would you do that?
Yes, that is what I was about to say. And also, we don't have the same format of everything that you're talking about, but what we have done is we started calling out we have a annual security conference. A very, very limited people can attend from our company, like, it is within our company. We are a very big security group, but we call all the product owners and engineering leaders and, SRE leaders. We call them and we ask them to speak about their things, and also we practiced talking about security in a positive way instead of talking about like it's an investment, it helps you. No, we started talking about how it going to help. So we had like I don't say rehearsal, but I would say like we practiced before we were going to that conference, like talking to our engineering leaders, like to portray a story that they can understand that this is going to help them.
Yeah, so it sounds like you practiced your talk tracks for your conference with your team. Yeah, that's great.
That's what we have done. Like we have narrated a story, and we have we as a group, as an internal team, our application security team, we actually practiced how we're going to portray that story, narrate that story about when we were migrating from one tool to another tool, because for us it is simple, for them it is like, okay, there is a new tool.
Yeah, I think doing team role playing with this kind of a document is a great idea. Come with a pre-read, and then I'm going to throw some scenarios with you. Maybe I'll play engineering manager or invite an engineering manager to come in and be difficult.
Yes, be tough.
Yeah.
So we also gathered the questions that may come up, and we were prepared for those questions. So it was smooth.
It sounds great. I saw a hand here.
Yeah, I'm just curious to what extent you would involve your team in creating this from the get-go as well. Because in my experience, weigh-in leads to buy.
Everybody has an opinion.
Everybody want them to adopt it. Having them be part of the process of creating it, I think is it.
Yeah, I think ways that you can have people be involved in the process of creating documents like this, and this really depends on the size of your team, is you can spread the load of doing interviews so long as everybody is asking the same questions so that you get consistent data. So you can spread that load. You can form a working group and say, hey, I, the manager, I'm not going to make this. Like, I want you all to give it a shot and I'll be your advisor. It kind of depends on like the size and experience of your team. Great points. Okay, we've touched on this a little bit, but it's really important to validate what you come up with. So you can go back to your original group, the people that you interviewed, maybe not all of them, because that could be overwhelming. It might be too many people. And you could say, hey, did I get this right? Again, you can share the document with trusted advisors. If you have a friend over in engineering that you trust not to just totally rip you a new one, then yeah, send it over to them. And then do a POV, right? We work with computers and tech and stuff, and we know how to run tech POVs. Run a people POV. See what happens if you test it on a small scale. Okay, I promised I would talk about AI. Can't AI do this for me? What do you think? Did anybody go to Joy's talk right before mine? What was Joy talking? Joy's here. Hi, Joy. I liked your talk. What was Joy talking about AI being good at? It starts with a P. Patterns. Patterns. It's, going off patterns, lots of different patterns. Can AI genuinely think? No. We're not there yet. Thank goodness. I have an 11-year-old and we've been showing him like all the movies from our childhood, and it's really shown me how many are about AI like destroying the world. We're not there yet, thank goodness. I don't think we're headed there. But no, it can't do it for you. But it can be your assistant. And so if we rewind back to, but Jen, will anybody use these? Will anybody understand it? This is where I actually think there's some really great promise with Gen AI. I've experimented with it a little bit myself. There's two ways that I would suggest using it. One is after you've made all your documents, feed it into an LLM and say, based on what I've told you, how would you recommend I approach this person? Write me my first draft of an email. I'll show you in a second. You can use it to translate metrics. You can say, here's what they care about. Here are my metrics. Give me a cheat sheet on how to explain this stuff. It's very good at that stuff. So I totally recommend doing that. I don't need to tell you at this point that it hallucinates. it generalizes, and it has a tendency to tell you what you want to hear. So I would not start out with, hey, AI, make me a persona for an engineering manager. Is gonna get it like 70% of there, not great. The other thing that AI is great at is filtering through interviews. So I talked earlier about recording your interviews. Has anyone used a tool called Notebook LM? A couple? I think it's by Google. What you can do with Notebook LM is you can upload recordings, like audio tracks into it, and ask it to summarize, ask it to look for trends. And so, for example, let's say you did 10 interviews and you had 5 different people conduct the interviews. Rather than the manual effort of listening to every interview and going over people's notes, like I've been there pre-AI, it's a pain. You can upload all of that into Notebook LM or something similar to that and say, summarize the trends. Or when I asked question X about metrics, what are all the metrics they said? And this is what can help you start to be a lot faster with this, and you can give this kind of responsibility to your team. Maybe don't give it to somebody who's really junior, because they do need to have the base amount of knowledge to know if the AI is full of crap, right? So it's kind of the same as if you were gonna farm out an engineering or a security task. You can farm this out to somebody who kind of knows enough about engineering to be dangerous, and then get you the rest of the way there with AI.
So is your goal to create a pattern and then use that pattern to learn from it?
Can you please say that again?
So is your goal to use the AI to get a pattern?
So the reason you would use AI here is you can train it on your data, and then it will use that data, and I think Joy probably could explain this better than I could, why this works, is you've given it source material, and you're having it summarize and learn from it. It's like you've given it context and a data source. So it's not so much a goal, it's using it as an accelerator. For something that you would have to do manually, this is a way to scrape through lots of different documents and data. You could even train a GPT and say, you GPT, you're my engineering leader, here's all this stuff from the persona, this is how you act, this is what you care about. You could train a GPT to be interactive and talk to it to test out, like if you don't have someone to come to your meeting to role play with you, you could role play with the GPT. So here's a little bit of a small example of how I used, in this case, I think it was Gemini. I fed in all of the documents that I showed you, and I told it I'm trying to improve my communication with engineering leaders at my company. We have very different metrics. Sometimes it seems like they don't complement each other. I went ahead and listed out the AppSec metrics. I gave it all the data and said, hey, can you give me a guide here? And I was actually really impressed with what it came out with. On the right side, it made a column for the AppSec metrics, such as MTTR. It mapped it to engineering metrics. So it said, you know, there's some DORA metrics here that are relevant to MTTR. You can look at lead time for changes, time to restore service. It explained the relationship between the metrics, and then it gave a full explanation of what it is. So this is just one example of, if you do this homework in advance, you can start to answer questions that you have in a much more like effective and rapid way. And that's it. So now's a great time for questions, or if you connect with me, happy to send you slides and resources. This is something I'm really passionate about, because when I talk with people in the community, again, most of the time the tools are not the problem. Like, it feels really great to blame the tools. As an vendor, you know, I should tell you blame the tools and buy my tool, but honestly, it's usually people that are the problem, and not understanding the people in your organization. Any other questions? Yeah, over here.
I'm wondering how you would make recommendations of changes based on the scale, or sorry, the size and maturity of an organization.
What kind of changes?
Well, you use a lot of examples of things I see that would be in large organizations that have mature processes, mature metrics, or even have the same foundational understanding of values. Like, is the security program even a goal that I have to work with, like a compliance goal, something I have to do or not do? How would this process change in any way, or is this can just be?
It's just, so the question generally is, does this work at a smaller organization? The answer is yes. It's just that your data sample size is smaller because the number of people are smaller, and there may be a lot of I don't knows to that question. And so rather than being able to definitively say, hey, I know this maps to XYZ DORA metric that you're using, it could be, okay, you don't have metrics set up yet. What do you care about? Because they probably care about something even if they haven't determined a metric. So I work with a lot of small companies as well. And typically at a smaller company, security is not as far away from the engineering side. It may even report into engineering. So you may find that this is not as necessary at a smaller company because you're, depending on how small it is, literally sitting in the engineering organization and going to all of their meetings. But if you're at like maybe, I don't know, over 200 person company, that's when you start to get separation between like the orgs, and there may still be some ambiguity on what each organization is doing and what their goals are. So you may have to go up to company goals. That could be a way to get around this. So keep going higher rather than going lateral. Back here.
How personal are the personas, right? Because obviously you could say lead engineer for a SaaS company in Austin, Texas, and a few other metrics, or you could say it's Jane.
How personal are the personas? Yeah.
Do we want to really make it part Jane, or do we want to keep it super high level?
So the question is, how personal should the personas be? In my opinion, this has a lot to do going back to company size. If you literally have one engineering leader, then yeah, this is Jane. This is what Jane cares about. This is Jane's messaging guide. If you have more than one person, then it should be more general.
Oh, right, if there's 10.
Or even 2. Yeah, but like, you know, something that we do at my company is we all have users manuals. It's for like how to, you know, how do I like to interact with people, and what do I care about in my, you know, function. So you could think of it a little bit like if it's a one-on-one situation, like building a user manual as opposed to a generalized persona.
That makes sense. Something like DISC or one of those things of like how to talk to other people.
A little bit, but it would be literally more like this is what Jane cares about as opposed to this is her MBTI or something like that. Yeah, sure. Let's see, how are we doing on time? We have
only 1 minute.
1 minute. There's time for one more question if there's one. I am between you and lunch. Is there one over here? Okay.
Just thinking, right? Like right now you talked about a different org, right? We are from security org and we are trying to convince the org leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, to start this, you need to convince your leader.
So a question is, how would you convince your own leader to invest time in this? I would point back to what's your effectiveness track record been in getting your initiatives through. If there's organizational understanding that there's discord between, let's say, your org and the engineering org, or if it's like, gosh, we spend a whole month just getting everybody's buy-in before we can start a project. So doing things like this will improve relationships and decrease the amount of time it takes to start a new project. So if those are things your leader cares about, then that's the way that I would talk to them. You could build a persona for your leader. All right, well, thank you all. You've been great.
Yeah.